Iraqis marched to demand jobs and improve services in the largest demonstration yet against Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi. Their appeal is a repeat of previous protests. So are Iraq's leaders listening, and why isn't the government able to deliver? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. Iraq's barely year-old government is being forced to deal with the largest nationwide protests since taking over. Riot police contained demonstrators in Baghdad on Wednesday, 24 hours after bullets and tear gas were fired. At least 3 people died and hundreds of others were injured in Baghdad as well as other cities. High levels of corruption and unemployment are 2 main reasons for the anger. And there's unrest over the recent dismissal of an army commander credited with defeating ISIL in Mosul 2 years ago. Imran Khan has more from Baghdad.
The protesters' demands are very simple. They're calling for the government to create more jobs and more opportunities, particularly for the poor in society. They also say that the government has failed to tackle corruption, which has led to a lack of development. What surprised the government is how quickly these protests spread, not just here in Baghdad, but in Nasiriyah and in Najaf as well. And that's taken the government by surprise. They're actually forming a government task force to look into how this took about. Now, the events of Tuesday took place very early in the day, in the afternoon, when there was a very small protest. That was quickly dispersed by the security forces. Then there was a call on social media, and then there was a much larger protest on Tuesday night. And that's really when those big clashes happened between the protesters and the security forces. They tried to come across the bridge from Tahrir Square. Tahrir Square is just about half a kilometre that way, and it looks like the protest movement is developing. Now, that's going to be a concern for the government. The big fear is this: if the protest movement becomes a nationwide movement, and that'll really concern the government, not just for security reasons, but for political reasons as well. A lot of these people are young, they've never voted before, and certainly they'll be looking to their political leaders to try and give them something, to give them some hope for the future. They say that they have no hope for the future, and that's why they're out on the streets.
Well, let's take a closer look at why Iraqis are angry. Youth unemployment stands at 25%. Many protesters are university graduates who can't find a job. And they blame corruption and religious favoritism for many of Iraq's problems. Transparency International ranks Iraq as the 12th most corrupt country in the world. And since 2004, almost $450 billion of public funds have disappeared, according to official figures. Another persistent complaint is the poor quality of public services. Shortages of electricity and water and failing infrastructure continue to plague communities.
No one is helping us. No one is supporting us. We're giving our blood and we're getting hurt. Our youth is gone and we have no results. We want to internationalize our case because there are no results. We're poor. We have nothing but our voice and ourselves, while they have the weapons and the money.
Our problem is with the parliament. It is them who distribute the haul among the thieves. We do not want a parliamentary system. We want a Republican presidential system to lead us.
Today, the Iraqi people have lived 16 years under a parliamentary system that does not work. All we have seen of it are wars, blood, fighting, and looting. The corrupts are passing their position to one another.
Let's introduce our panel now. In Baghdad, Ali Al-Nashmi. He is a political analyst and specialist on the modern history of Iraq. By Skype in Athens is Judit Neurink. She's a political analyst on Iraqi affairs who's watching the protests very closely. And in Ankara, Yusuf Alabarda, a Middle East analyst. Thank you all for being on Inside Story. Thank you for joining us. Ali Al-Nashmi in Baghdad. The problems facing Iraqis have existed for years. What exactly sparked this week's demonstrations?
No, there is many things happened in this week that arising, and in order that there's some agenda behind that. But I think many things happened, especially when they relieve the General al-Saadi, and that they shift their position from the high commander in the Iraqi chief and shifted to the another position. That things makes many talks in the street of Iraq, and in order that I think many people on the street shouting and begin to talking, and this is a conspiracy against the Iraqi people or the Garsi, and something, and to use the things for the another agenda. That in order that I think what's happening yesterday, it's coming because the suffering Iraqi people.
Right.
And you see yesterday.
Yeah, indeed, many demonstrators, let me just explain to our audience that many demonstrators indeed have been holding posters of Iraq's counterterrorism chief, Abdul Wahab al-Saadi, whose recent dismissal set off controversy, with some people blaming it on Iranian-backed Iraqi politicians. So would you say there's a direct link between his dismissal and the demonstrations that we've seen in Baghdad and elsewhere?
This is one because of many things. So the people and the protesters, youngs now, they are raising many slogans, many demand. All that dreams they are rising now, yesterday and today. They need jobs. They want to fight the corruption, the corrupted people. They want electricity. They want many things. But I think so. The problem of Al-Saadi is a shift, or moving the place, or moving the problem.
Okay.
In order that I think many people use that, and they talking about conspiracy from the foreign agenda.
Judith in Athens, I know you've been following the situation very closely. Those who've taken to the streets have denounced a host of problems that plague their daily life, including, of course, corruption, unemployment, and a lack of services. Now, surprisingly for Iraq, there's no political faction behind these demonstrations. There was no political faction that explicitly called for Tuesday's protests. How significant is that in your view? And are these demonstrations spontaneous?
Yeah, it's a fact that normally when there's demonstrations in Iraq, there is a political power behind it, and especially Muqtada al-Sadr in the past years, and he's in Iran at the moment. He's been very quiet for the past couple of months. I think there is a connection to the fact that there is so much violence being used against the protesters, and the fact that he is not involved this time. Before, all the demonstrations that he organized had been sort of peaceful. Even when the demonstrators broke into the Green Zone a couple of years ago, the police hardly did anything about it. And now there is the army on the street against these young people mainly. And they are really shooting with bullets. And okay, they shoot in the air, but bullets come down, so people get wounded. We already have heard about at least 200 people who got wounded and something like 3 people who were killed.
Judith, in the summer of 2018, there were similar nationwide protests in Basra, more precisely. Has the situation not improved at all for Iraqis since then? I mean, have things gotten worse for Iraqis?
Well, the main problem in Basra was electricity, and that has become a little bit better. But the main problem really is corruption, and that's what most of these people protest against. And the corruption has not improved at all because it's ingrained in the system. Political parties and militia are very much part of the corruption. If you want to get a job in the government, and every year there are 10,000s of people who are graduating and waiting for a job in the government as the private sector is so small. If you're waiting for a job like that, you will have to pay. I spoke to someone who told me that she had already paid for her job that she's going to start after the holidays. And that was $10,000. Now, for anything, any contract that is being made, a contract that people usually make with people that have some kind of ties with parties. Everything always goes by money, by paying. And as long as this system is in place, not very much will change.
Yeah. Ali Al-Nashmi, your thoughts on this issue of corruption. Transparency International has ranked Iraq as the 12th most corrupt country in the world. You're in Baghdad. Tell us how this corruption manifests itself in everyday life for Iraqis.
Now, the Iraqi people now, they're talking every day, every minute about the corrupted people who are ruling the Iraq now. And they know, and they are, all the Iraqi people convinced that all the politicians or all the MPs and all the government, as they say, they are corrupted people. In order that they prove that, because they say we spend $1 trillion in Iraq in 20 years or 11 years, but nothing on the ground. No electricity, no waters, no medicines, no health. Everything is very worse, very bad, and going to worse. In order that, I think the most problem now in Iraq is the corrupted, because now the new generation is coming. That generations, they don't found anything on the ground. They no job, no, the wheel of the economic is stopped, no trade, no agriculture, no industry, nothing. In order that, they talking about to relieve all the rulers, that to relieve all the government, because they don't see anything about them. Then I think this is what's behind what's happening and what the protesters needed. The first things they want to government to fight the corrupted or the corruption situation, but they think, and one of them, they use the corrupted people, because now the Iraqi government they sign many agreements with many companies, but all that money goes to the buckets of the corrupted people.
Yusuf Alabarda, let me bring you into the conversation now. What are your thoughts on what's happening right now in Iraq? It's significant, isn't it, to see these protests in Baghdad, because many had viewed the Iraqi capital as being in a state of recovery since the fall of ISIL.
Yeah, in terms of security, it was true. But in terms of economy and the social life, we are familiar such kind of protests inside Iraq since from 2013, 14, and 15, especially in the southern provinces of Iraq. So when you take a look at what's going on inside Iraq again, although the recovering from the Daesh militants and occupation in many parts of Iraq, the issue is that people are protesting their economical positions and unemployment rate and public goods, healthcare, lots of issues. So when you take a look at to the structure of such kind of issues anywhere inside the world, this is very normal that the people may protest because of those situations. But I think that since Iraq is very close to a failed state, I can say this is very dangerous because it may be manipulated by another countries, especially around the vicinity of Iraq.
Well, speaking of that, other countries, during the protests in 2018 in Basra, there was a lot of anger towards Iranian-backed Iraqi politicians. Do you sense it's different this time around, that the anger is not as much directed towards the external forces, but rather at Iraqi politicians?
Yeah, as far as the telephone calls which I made with my friends inside Iraq, I can say that this is a little bit different. They have no anger and hatred for the sectarian issues. But what I can say that it can be manipulated to any kind of hatred, to any kind of protest inside the Iraq. So the protest which took place in 2018 is a little bit different when you compare it in protests in 2019. So there is no unified leadership who is guiding these protests. They are gathering with each other by using especially the social media. But I can say that the social background in terms of economy, social goods, healthcare is very fertile for such kind of protests inside Iraq, because this is a war-torn country and very close to a failed state, and there are rivalries among United States, Iran, and Turkey. For this reason, it is very fragile, the situation inside Iraq, I can say.
Okay, let me bring Judith back in. And Judith, to get your thoughts on what changes the protesters are seeking. I know you've been speaking to a lot of people on the ground in Iraq. The people who've been demonstrating, their rallying cry has been, "We want change." What sort of change are they precisely looking for?
I think the exact idea of what change they want is very difficult for them to see. What they want is an end to corruption. They want another government, a government that is not corrupt. The problem is, of course, how do you do that in a situation that has grown since 2003, where everything is divided according to religion and ethnicity? For the young people, I also see two groups which are very clear. On the one hand, the graduates that have not been able to get a job, although everybody who studies in Iraq expects a job with the government afterwards. And then you have those people who came back from the war with ISIS, those volunteers that followed the fatwa of Ayatollah Sistani. Quite a few of them are still without income, in a bad situation. The government has yesterday said that they will speed up to let them enter into the security forces, but still, it's not happening at the moment. So, and these people are trained, they know how to use weapons, so this is really the most dangerous group that there is amongst these very discontented youth.
Ali Al-Nashmi, the government of Prime Minister Adel Al-Mahdi came to power just a year ago. There are those who will say that a year isn't enough time to achieve change in Iraq, to bring about change. Why do you think the government hasn't been able to deliver?
No, I think it's 1 year. It's enough to do something. But Abdul Mahdi, in the eye of the Iraqi people, he did nothing. He signed many agreements with many countries and with many companies. It's that agreements not in the side of Iraqi people, and he gave the Kurdish in the north everything, and he returned for them many positions. It was in the Folly, the center of Baghdad, after the election of Kurdish in 270. Then the Iraqi people see the Abdul Mahdi, he did nothing, and Abdul Mahdi he helped the corrupted people, and he didn't bring anyone for his government. And the majority of his government, as the people say, they are not they have the ability to do something. Then the Iraqi come to the street now to want for change. But you see that rally or that protesters, they don't have one slogan. That means they don't have one leader and one direction and one guidance. They are coming on the street looking for everything because they are young, teenagers. They are looking and they're coming from the social media. They are not follow the religious party or any political party. Then I think it's very difficult to control of them. But if the politicians of the parties, especially the regionalist parties, if they interfere now in that protester, they'll destroy that protester, and they will use, they will carry that wave for their privileges. And I think in this night, there is many meetings will happen between the government, Abdul Mahdi, and many politicians to give them some privileges, and they will control the street and to stop that protesting. This is what I'm afraid. But I think this protesting now is the most serious than any protesting before, because all the protesters before, they are coming from their leaders, especially Al-Sadriyin. But now they are coming,
Let me ask Yusuf in Ankara about that. The fact that these protests are so far leaderless, how big of a challenge does that pose to the government of Prime Minister Adel Al-Mahdi? And do you see this government being able to control the situation?
I can say that in the short term, this government will not be able to control the economical position of the Iraq and their economical situations and unemployment rate. But what I will say, changing governments will not help also to fight against corruption, to fight against economical problems, to fight against terrorism, and to fight against all kinds of security threats. Do you know why? Because if you do not change the circumstances, and if you do not change the parameters which is coming, inputs from the outside or inside to the system, you can get the same results if you change the government. So in order to get different results, the Iraqi people should come together and change the incomes. But when there is a big rivalries, especially in between Tehran and United States, I believe that there won't be any change, even if they change the government.
Right.
And in the short term, I can summon my speech that Mr. Prime Minister Al-Mahdi will not be able to change the situation in the short term.
Regardless of the politics, Yusuf, do you think it's really possible for Iraqis to come together and to unite as one when you take into account the religious and sectarian divide?
Unfortunately, you are very true. It is impossible that the Iraqis may come together because of the sectarian and also ethnical division when you take a look at the country. In the midterm, I can say that there are three parts of Iraq which will be governed from the Shiites, the Sunnis, and the Kurdish at the northern part of the Iraq. So it seems that in the midterm, there is no unity of Iraq, although during the elections, all the political leaders have promised to the Iraqi people for the unity of Iraq, but I can say on the ground, it is impossible for now.
Okay. Judith, your thoughts on that. Is it possible that these protesters that we're seeing on the streets and all Iraqis can come together as one? And do you agree with Yusuf in Ankara, who says that changing government will not resolve the situation?
I agree. Changing the government will not change much. I mean, we have just had a new government. Abdullahdi has been there for just over a year. Although this government is a government of technocrats, the problem is that in the ministries, there are people of the parties. There are corrupt people. They are still there, or there are new people there, but they are still corrupt. And the corruption is really the thing that has to be rooted out before anything will change. And I don't see that happen very soon.
All right, Ali in Baghdad, I'll give you the last word. You know, you being in Baghdad, how do you see this situation evolving? Do you think these protests could lead to a new round of instability in Iraq? And how do you stop that from happening, you think?
No, I think they will continue just 3 days, especially in the Friday. But I think some agreement will happen with many politicians and will controlling. And I think Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi, he will say some decisions, and that decision will relieve in next weeks. And I think nothing will happen after that.
All right. We will see how the situation evolves, of course, in the coming days and bring you all the latest here on Al Jazeera. Ali Al-Nashmi, Judit Neurink and Yusuf Alabarda, thank you very much for taking part in our discussion today. And thank you as well for watching. You can always watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can, of course, also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly Thibault, and the whole team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.